Hi, this is Joe Chambers. Thanks for watching Musicians Hall of Fame Backstage Vault Series. The Vault Series is a series of interviews that we shot starting back in 2004, 2 years before the Musicians Hall of Fame and Museum opened to the public. If you like what you see, please be sure to hit like, subscribe, and the notification bell so you don't miss any of our new content. Thanks for watching. Today's guest is Les Paul. I really don't know where to start with Les. He changed the music industry from his innovations from multitrack recording to inventing a harmonica holder. I mean, he was just all over the chart, man. One of the people too that was probably the most famous and probably the most approachable. He didn't know me from Adam, to be honest with you. He was just that nice of a guy. If you went to see him play in New York, it didn't matter who you were, you could talk to him. You don't see that very often. Les had told me that we were going to go to his house and do an interview, and he got sick. He almost died. So much so that he even missed his Grammy presentation. I think Jeff Beck filled in and took care of that for him. But he came back, and we were in New York one Christmas night, and I did not think that Les would be playing on Christmas night, but I should have known that he was. And so just in case he was there, I carried a little ghetto-like video camera in my pocket. When I saw that he was playing at the Iridium, I went and told Rusty, his son, who videoed every single show that Les did, that I was there, and I was, could Les meet with me and do an interview before the show? And of course he did. So we met in a little bitty room, just maybe 12 by 12. No, that's way big. It had a love seat in it, okay? So Les was sitting on one end of the love seat. I was sitting on the other end, squishing myself as far as I could into the arm of the sofa, getting as far away from Les as I could, which was about 1.5 feet, really. He was sitting there eating a club sandwich, and his table was a Roland amplifier. I thought it couldn't have been more appropriate. I said, Les, just say, hey, man, I know I know who you are, but this is, for the kids in the future. So if you want to be Rhubarb Red, or if you want to be Les Paul, say whatever you want to say. And when you get stuck, I'll ask you a question. Les didn't get stuck. He's told this story so many times that my arm was like frozen for a month. I just couldn't, I was just stuck. I was not going to tell him, hey, man, can you stop for a minute and give me a break? My arm has gone to sleep. I pushed my finger up here to help hold it up and steady it a little bit. It's just a great interview. You can see what a great guy Les was. I hope you enjoy it. This was Christmas night in New York at the Iridium. Les Paul.
I'm Les Paul. I play the guitar, and a lot of people think I am a guitar because we sell a lot of Les Paul guitars. Now, my history starts out way back when I was a little kid born in Waukesha, Wisconsin. I had my brother and my mother drive me down to see the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. And there was a harmonica player called D. Ford Bailey. And D. Ford Bailey actually put me on the stage at the Grand Ole Opry in 1929. And I was called Rhubarb Red. I decided to become Les Paul as well as Rhubarb Red. And so in the morning I used to open the radio stations in Chicago at WLS, WJJD, WRND, WBBM, all those stations. And I was Rhubarb Red. From 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning until noon. At noon, I was Les Paul, a jazz guitar player. And I began to play with people like Art Tatum Roy Eldridge, Earl Hines, Nat Cole, Teddy Wilson, Benny Goodman, people like that. And it wasn't long that I had to make a decision as to who I was going to be, Rhubarb Brett or Les Paul. And so while I was in Chicago doing both Rhubarb Brett and Les Paul, I was planning to go either to the East Coast or the West Coast. And I flipped a coin with my trio, standing outside of the car with it all packed, as to whether we were going to go to Los Angeles or New York City. And the coin landed in New York City. And so we just went by the coin. And we landed within 2 blocks of where I'm doing this interview, at 48th Street. And this is 51st Street. And 53rd Street is where our home became and our offices at 53rd and Broadway, where Letterman does his show now. And at that time, Paul Whiteman was there, Tommy Dorsey was there, Fred Waring was there, all the big people. And so, luckily, we nailed Fred Waring in the hallway. And he was having his bathroom repainted. And so he was using Paul Whiteman's bathroom. And so he stepped out of the bathroom and was going to get in the elevator and go down to his floor. And I said, "Aren't you Fred Waring?" And he says, "Yeah, but I'm not looking for any." He says, "I've got 62 Pennsylvanians right now, and I'm not looking for any Pennsylvanians." And I said, "Well, could we play for you till the elevator gets here?" So he says, "There's nothing in the book that says you can't do that." And I said, "Okay." And so we let go with Jimmy Atkins, that's Chet Atkins' half-brother, Ernie Newton, my bass player, and myself. And he says, "Get in the elevator." Took us downstairs, and he stopped the rehearsal, 62 Pennsylvanians, and he says, "I met these hillbillies in the hallway upstairs." And he says, "If you like them as much as I do, I'm going to hire them." And I knew we were hired right there. And that gave us 5 years at the Vanderbilt Theater on 49th Street. So every day we broadcasted from New York, 5 days a week, with Fred Waring and his Pennsylvanians, featuring the Les Paul Trio. And little did I know that I would be here from that time and be back here playing again. In the midst of all this, I went back to Chicago and out to LA and joined Bing Crosby, Burns and Allen, Rudy Valley, and a bunch of people like that. And LA became my home until I got a phone call. And that phone call was from Listerine. And Listerine asked if I would entertain the idea of doing a show 5 times a day, 5 times a week, from our home, Mary and I, Mary Ford, Les Paul. And we made an agreement, and they would find us a home near where Listerine headquarters are in Lambert, New Jersey, Lambertsville. So we got a home in Mahwah, New Jersey, a beautiful home, and stayed here ever since. And lo and behold, I'm looking at 50 years, over 50 years, that I've been easily more than 50 years. Been on the East Coast and never dreamt of the East Coast. Was heading for LA, going to get in the movies, and going to make my career on the West Coast. Instead, it turned around where I was very fortunate made all the moves to go to the East Coast. And so here you are interviewing me tonight. And I'm still on Broadway.
When did you know you wanted to be a musician?
Well, I guess it's when they were putting in the sewer outside of my house, and a sewer digger broke with his friend for lunch. And out of his pail, he ate his sandwich, and then he would play the harmonica. And I leaped off my front porch, didn't have stairways yet. I leaped off of the front porch and went over to him and just stood in awe at what I heard. He played great blues harmonica. And he says, "Kid, I'm going to give this to you because you look like you would like to have it even more than me." So he gave me the harmonica, and my mother was standing there and put her hand out and says, "You don't get this harmonica until I boil it." Okay, so I always kid the people on the stage and say, and that's why when you get one of my guitars, it's been boiled.
I'm assuming the sewer worker was black.
Yes, he was.
And so when did you progress from the harmonica to the guitar, or what did come next?
Well, I tried all kinds of instruments. I tried the saxophone, I tried the piano, and my mother says, "Now you got something else in your mouth." And I switched to the piano, and she says, "Now you got your back turned to the audience, and you surely can't get around with a piano in the back seat of your car." And so I says, "Well, I'll go get a drum." And she says, "You're not going to bring it in this house." And she eliminated the accordion and a couple more instruments. And finally, by listening to the country people, I decided I was going to get a guitar and hook it up with my harmonica. So I made my own rack for the harmonica with some clothes hangers, and it turned out just great. It was my first invention, first job with the harmonica and the guitar, and I went to St. Louis, Illinois, got a job at KMOX, and this was when I was 13.
And what kind of guitar did you get when you started?
Sears Roebuck Troubadour, $3.95.
And then, so what happened after that?
I met up with a fellow that happened to be playing with Rube Tronson's Texas Cowboys, and it's quite a story. They snuck me in through the bathroom window out at a dance, a country dance, and I listened to Joe Wolverton play the guitar. I'd never heard anything like it. I'd never seen a guitar that nice, an L5 Gibson. And he played, and he says, I presume that you play guitar or are interested in the guitar." I said, "Yes, sir." And he says, "Here, play me something." And he corrected me, and he says, "Here's the way you should do it, right like this." He says, "I'll be back next week. I'm playing another place in the area." And so I did. And when he come back the following week, he showed me some more licks and everything. And the leader of the orchestra, Rube Tronson, said to me, "Kid, I'd like to talk to you." He took me out in the parking lot, and he says, "If I give you $8, would you join us? That's the highest I can pay you." I says, "I make more than that right here in Waukesha, playing my guitar and harmonica." So he went up to 10, he went up to 12. He says, "You're the highest paid man in the band. Join us, we'll pick you up next week." I said, "I'll have to go home and talk to my mother." I talked to my mother, and my mother says, "Well, it's up to you. You want to leave school and you want to go with a cowboy band? If you do, you go with Rube Johnson and his Texas Cowboys. And lo and behold, when I joined them in Malone, New York, they picked me up and drove me up there. I said, "Where is Joe?" The fellow that taught me this and handed me the guitar. "Oh," they said, "you don't know? You're taking his place." They let him go and hired me. And I was just shocked. The very guy that I wanted to be with, they let him go and hired me. And in about 4 months or so, I got a phone call from Joe. He says, "Hey, how would you like to come down to Camlex in St. Louis and you and I become a team?" And so we became a team and went from St. Louis to Springfield, Missouri, played all through that area, and of course went on to Chicago at WBBM and WLS and all of that.
You hear the Sears and Roebuck guitar. What was the follow-up guitar to that?
What was the follow-up?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Joe Overton said to me, "You know that guitar you're playing is terrible." He says, "I'm going to take you. We'll drive up to Kalamazoo, and I'll take you up to the Gibson factory and introduce you to the people up there. And they make the finest guitar in the world." And we drove up there and we played for their party. They were having a Christmas party. And we got an L5. In fact, we got 2 L5s. He got a new one, so he had 2, and I bought one. And so we left with 2 and he had 1, so we had 3 L5s. Went back to Springfield, Missouri, and in a few weeks we were offered a big job in Chicago and played for the World's Fair. And so that was my second guitar, the L5. So I went from the bottom to the top in a week. Yeah.
How did you become an inventor?
Well, that's an interesting story. I was playing, as a kid, halfway between Waukesha and Milwaukee, which is 19 miles away. Halfway in between, which is now not even a suburb. They're so close together that it's like one big city, Milwaukee. Okay. So I go out to Brookfield, Wisconsin, and I'm playing at Gerke's Corners, a barbecue stand. And I hooked up a PA system made out of my mother's radio and speakers and my father's speakers and radio. And I had it all hooked up. And I made my own microphones and I made my own, just everything to get out there and sing and play. So I was singing into the telephone, and a fellow rode up in a rumble seat of a car, and they were going to order their barbecued sandwiches and their root beer. And he wrote a note to the car hop saying, "Red, your voice is fine, your harmonic is fine, I can hear you talking and singing, that's fine, but the guitar is not loud enough." And I went home and I said to my mother, "I have a problem. I've got to make my guitar louder." And so I said, the obvious thing is, how do you make a guitar? First, to find out what material it should be made out of. So I made one out of a railroad track, a big long piece that the railroad train rides on. That's 2.5 feet long and weighs a ton. And then I got some of the softest wood, pine wood, that I could find. And I strung the string up exactly the same on the 2 different forms. One being a railroad track and one being a box of fruit, okay? And when I strung them both up and listened to them by taking the receiver of the telephone, taking the magnets out and putting them under the string, I went running to my mother and I says, boy, I've got the answer. And I says, you've never heard sound like this in your life, and I can turn it up real loud, and it's terrific. And my mom says, the day you see a cowboy on a horse playing a railroad track, and so she says, I think you better think this thing over. And I did, and the more I thought about it, the more I thought I'm going to make this sound like a real, look like a real guitar, and sound like a real guitar. And so I made it, and I made it, and I made it. And in the meantime, I'm going uphill, learning music, studying music, and becoming a musician. In the meantime, I'm also studying electronics and became very good at both. And finally, in 1941, I made the log. And that's a 4x4 that's with wings on its side. First I made the log, tried it in a club, nobody paid any attention to it. So I put wings on it, went back the following week, and everybody went crazy over it. So I said, my God, the people listen with their eyes. So if it don't look like a guitar, they don't accept it as a guitar. If you put wings on the side of it, and the wings were the sides, the two sides of a 4x4, made it look exactly like a guitar. So I knew it had to be made of wood. It had to be made good and solid. Okay, and I'm a young kid, So at 41, I got this thing, and a lot of people, most everybody, turned it down. Okay, and there were a few. Leo Fender come over, and he would see it in my backyard. And they would look at it, and they were interested in what I was doing. So Leo came to me one day and says, why don't you come in and join me? We'll make a Les Paul guitar for you, and you'll become famous with me. And I said, well, no, I'm going to go with Gibson one day. I took it to Gibson for 10 years. Gibson says, the character with the broomstick with the pickups on it. And they laughed at me. I didn't know that until the chairman of the board told me at the Mayo Clinic. And we're eating dinner. He says, Les, I've got to tell you, we laughed at you for many years. A good 10 years before we took you seriously. And of course it became history in '52 because the electric guitar, the Les Paul guitar, was to come out and become big, big, big. And it was at that time, in that first 10 years, that I said, hey, I've got an idea. You guys should buy the place where I made the log and the place where I knew the guys very well. You should buy Epiphone. Buy the name. They're gone. Buy the name. So Gibson says, what in the world are we going to do with Epiphone? I says, well, tomorrow's another day. You may take all your rejects that you burn or something like that and put a guitar out so that the kids can learn to play good, and a little blemish here or there or some imperfection, you got a name, Epiphone. Then years later, at the old Iridium up the street here, when I said to the president of Gibson, I said, you sure take a long time to listen. And he says, yeah, it's been 6 years. But he says, I did listen. And I said, well, that you did. And what I was telling him back then, go have your guitar made in the Orient, and then you can compete with the Orient, okay? And the rest of the world with their guitars it can be much more economical. Make a fine instrument and use the name Epiphone, and they did. And of course, the rest is history. And now Epiphone is big, big, big. And of course, Gibson remains big, big, big. And I've been through so many presidents at Gibson since I started.
Well, you got Henry.
I got Henry, and he's just great. He's a great man to work with, and he tries, he works hard at what he does. And you throw him an idea, and he'll try it. He'll try it.
So, in 1960, when the Les Paul changed over, or maybe it was 61 and 62, when they were making they put Les Paul on the SG style guitars.
Yeah.
Why did that cease?
That ceased because of a divorce between Mary and I. And during the divorce, I didn't want to get involved in my company, which was Gibson, to be entered into the divorce proceedings. That should be left, that's mine, that's over there on this end of the deal. And so we made our settlements, and it took years, and so Capitol had to wait, and Gibson had to wait. So I had to leave. It was Capitol where you re-sign, and when we're divorced, they're not going to re-sign there. And so I went with Columbia, and Columbia Records, and stayed away from Gibson, and Gibson understood. And I says, they came to me and asked, well, give us one of your guitars to put out. And I said, I'll give you the SG, and you can go put that out. But that's all, just the SG.
So that lasted 2 years, 61, 62.
Yeah.
They actually, so it wasn't that you didn't like the body style of the SG, because I'd always heard that was what it was. I heard that you just didn't think that the SG body met the qualifications or specifications.
You are absolutely right. They sent me an SG, I says, hey, if you straighten up that neck, if you get that so that you don't bend on it and change keys, you have to support it more there, okay? And then I will endorse the SG. And so when they do reinforce the neck, which they've done, they put the name Les Paul back on some of the SGs. If it's got 2 pickups, then it don't bear my name. With 3 pickups, it does bear my name.
Do you know how many Les Pauls are sold or have been sold?
You know, I'm embarrassed to say, I don't know how much money I got in the bank. I have no idea as how many guitars I sold. I don't have any idea how many Grammys I have, or Oscars, or anything else. I just don't pay any attention to any of it. And it's good to be just as normal a person, because if you start reading and you start knowing and you start living like you can live, if you want to go crazy, okay? So if I'm very successful, I can do whatever I please. I can go out and, I don't like another guy, I can buy his whole business. I'm only joking, but it's something that I don't particularly get involved in.
So like McDonald's, you don't know how many billions you've sold in.
I have no idea, and if whoever knows, just don't tell me.
The multi-track thing. I mean, That just come to you one day or what?
No, being in electronics, old Joe Wolverton, way back at the beginning, he says, you're a funny guy. He says, you're busier than hell. Be in our bedroom or in our cottage. We're in St. Louis, we're in Springfield, Missouri, and I got motors going, and I got wheels going, and I'm building things, inventing things, and making cutting lathes, recording my stuff and Joe's stuff. And he was fascinated. But this wasn't his thing at all. So he just couldn't understand me being two people, two very involved people, one in electronics. And so when I made Sound on Sound, in 1949, when I came out with Sound on Sound, it kind of stunned the world. And then you got to figure ahead of that, I was already into doing multiples. And so the multiples came first. And that started when I was in Waukesha with my mother, and I was just to become rhubarb bread. I'm so tiny, so small. And I would see this player piano, and those holes go by. So I'd punch a hole in there, and finally I learned where I could, in the blank spots where there's nothing going on, I would manage to quickly punch some holes in there. And I finally made a ruler so that I could, the device, so that I could put the holes in the right place. And so I could make it octaves, I could make it a seventh, a ninth, a 13th, I could do what I wished. And of course, there's a lot of Band-Aids on those gold piano rolls. But I was learning to become an engineer, and my mind was opening up to the future. And it was there that I found out that the piano was digital and the phonograph was analog. And this is back where the crank phonographs. In those days, my mother had the crank, and if I didn't weed the garden and rake the leaves and do all of my chores, I didn't get the crank on Wednesday for that phonograph. And what good is a phonograph if that spring isn't tightened up?
What was the first thing you recorded in Multitrack?
What is the first thing I did?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the first was on Sound, and the last was on Sound on Sound. Sound on Sound was 1949 when Bing Crosby brought over a machine, and he said to me, come in the backyard, I was in Hollywood, and he says, hey, I got something in the car for you, Les. Help me bring it in. So I walked out to the front yard with him, and I was sure that it was a trunk full of cheese, because he's on for Kraft cheese, or a Philco radio. So those two things that entered my mind, that it must be one of those two. And he opened it up, and here's this big box, and it was an Ampex. And so I took the Ampex and I put it in my backyard. And I set it up on some stools, and I was busy making a multiple, like Lover, the beginning, the very beginning. And so I'm making something like that. And I'm looking at this tape machine. And I hadn't turned it on, I hadn't put it together, and I hadn't plugged it in. But I knew the tape machine, because this is another story. But I saw the first tape machine that was confiscated from the Nazis. So I happened to be lucky enough to know all about a tape machine. And so I looked at the tape machine and I said, Mary, she was hanging the laundry in the backyard. She was out there with clothespins and hanging up on the clothesline, the clothes. I said, hey, junk the whole thing, lock the place up, or leave it in an hour. So throw some stuff in your suitcases and bags were on the roll. I just invented. And I had it written down on an envelope. And that was sound on sound. That made everything. I made 6 of them on a disc, on discs in the garage. And after Caravan, from Mockingbird Hill to Tennessee Waltz to How High the Moon and World's Waiting with the Sunrise, excuse me, to Tiger Rag, and all the way up to Via con Dios and on. There was some 31 gold records, and it became just so big, so big. And it was all because of these things that come along that I would just stare at them, look at them, and say, Mary, we're leaving, we're on the road. And she's in New Mexico, we're in New Mexico, and she says to me, but how do you know it's going to work? And she's worried about it. She says, well, what if it doesn't work? I says, oh, it'll work. I got it written out here on this envelope. And she says, but you don't have a prototype of it or anything. Oh, it'll work, it'll work. By the time I got to Illinois, I was beginning to wonder if Mary wasn't right. And when I got there, Ampex, I had called them and asked them for another head. And they didn't know why I wanted another head, but I wanted another head. So they sent me another head. And so I added that 4th head to my tape machine, and I'll be darned if we at the St. Lawrence Hotel didn't try it. Mary sings howdy, or says howdy, and I say 1, 2, 3, 4 testing, and they're both on the tape. And I throw my crutch in I was walking around with a crutch at the time, threw my crutch in there, and Mary and I danced down the hallway, and that was the beginning of a whole new world. Okay, I now invented sound on sound. And all the hits made by Mary and I were made that way. The 8-track came in afterwards, after we had our honeymoon in the recording world and were about to retire. So Mary and I made so much, so fast, okay, that we could retire easily and never have to work another day in our life before the 8-track ever came about and before Gibson became so big. So life was good to us. Everything just turned out right.
How does it feel to see basically the top guitarist in the field of just about any field actually, when you see him playing your name brand guitar?
Yeah, it feels pretty darn good, I'll tell you that. It really, it's a wonderful feeling for a lot of reasons. I'm glad that the kid has what I had to build, and that is in my bedroom. I could have it in my garage, I could have it in my basement, but I could have all the things that are necessary to make a great record. And of course, me being the first ones to do that, it was rather crude compared to what you got today with your computers and what you're doing now. And like this will be crude another 20 years from now, or you wouldn't even be caught dead with what they're doing now.
But like when you see Jimmy Page play a Les Paul guitar in front of hundreds of thousands of people, and know that people that maybe never even heard a Les Paul record knows your name, and like you said, thinks you're a guitar,
Yeah. I look back. George Benson was playing a Les Paul guitar. Jeff Beck started out on a Les Paul guitar. Jimi Hendrix started out on a Les Paul guitar. All those guys were playing Les Paul guitars.
Did you ever meet Hendrix?
Sure. Yeah, I didn't meet Jimi Hendrix where I shook hands with him or talked with him. I walked into a place where he was auditioning for a job, And I was on my way into New York to get Simon and Garfunkel, their tape of Sounds of Silence. It hadn't come out yet. And I heard this fellow in this tavern auditioning for a job. And I went out to my son, and it was in the afternoon. I says, well, the bartender's in there watering the drinks down, and I says, Jake doesn't know who the guy is or whatever, but I says, as soon as we deliver the tape, let's come back this way, and I'll stop in and maybe I'll grab this guy and manage him, because I said, he's great. I says, he's a wild man. And I says, I'm hearing something new and different, and I think he'd be great. But I also had my eye on Willie Nelson then, and Roy Clark, Glenn Campbell, and a lot of other people. I flew out to see Glenn Campbell when he was just a studio man. He was on ABC because I went over there and I listened to him. I had Thumbs Carlisle, I had this one, I had that one. And finally I said, I don't want to be a nurse to all these guys and manage them. That's just not my thing. But I don't want to play anymore. And so Chet called me up and says, can I have the name Mr. Guitar? Seeing you're retiring. I said, sure, Chet, go ahead, take my name. Okay. And then others called and says, can I have your pick? Johnny Smith called up and says, can I have your pick? And make a pick and put my name on it because you're retiring. And a lot of things like that were happening. And as far as I was concerned, I was retiring. Mary was retiring, I was retiring, and that was our last job was in the 60s, and we said, look, we got everything we need. And so why knock ourselves out? You know. And it wasn't until 1980 and I had my heart problems, and then with a lot of surgery and a lot of problems and arthritis setting in and everything else, along comes my doctor saying to me, promise me two things, you'll be my friend and that you'll work hard. And I says, work hard doing what? And he says, I don't care, just so you work hard. I said, I thought that's what got me in here. He says, no, that's what's going to keep you alive. So here I'm going on 91 and I'm busy working. So that's the difference. The difference is that I love to work, and I love to meet people like yourself, like others. The place is full of them. And it gives me a chance for a reason to get out of bed. Otherwise, I'd just make it to the men's room.
Is there anything you would like to say to young people?
If you're going to be a musician, make sure that you got a good ear and good time, because you can't buy it in the store. And the second thing is you better plan on working hard, because it's not easy. And it's tough. You got your ups and downs with this thing, and it's not like being a plumber or a butcher. This is a tough job to do, be a good musician, and to get through these times where there's so much drugs and so much temptation going on. And the best advice I can give you is that if you're going to do it, roll up your sleeves, because boy, oh boy, you got to believe in it, and it's practice, practice, practice. And there's always someone better than you are, and you'll find that out all the way along that road in life. There's always someone better than you are.